Hello, my name is Adam, and welcome to the Australian War History Podcast. We hope you enjoy the first episode of the Timor series, in which Wayne, my dad, and myself have retold the stories of Australia's campaign to defend Timor from Japanese invasion during World War II. Please visit australianwarhistory.com.au for show notes and other stories about Australia's war past. Next series will cover Australia's experiences in Vietnam. This is our first podcast, so it's been a big learning curve for the both of us. We hope at the end of the series you'll have a deeper understanding of what it took to defend the lucky country. From Wayne and myself, thank you. Hello, this is Adam Lamotte for the Australian War History Podcast. I'm introducing Wayne Lamotte, the consultant / historian / World War II buff. How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, on this beautiful sunny Saturday.
Yeah, chilly Saturday.
Election day in Australia. Important day.
Very, very. So I thought I'd start off and talk about what got me interested in war and what led to the idea of the podcast and why we're here. So my dad has always had a very huge interest in, Dad is Wayne, has always had a huge interest in war, and we had a bunch of VHS tapes. They're all block tapes that were in the cupboards, and I always used to pop the VHS tapes in and watch the documentaries.
I think they're called World at War.
World at War.
Yeah,
okay.
and there are 12 episodes.
There was 12 episodes. It was
narrated
like 12
by Sir Laurence Olivier.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, well I might have to go back and watch them again.
I've got them all here.
Really?
Yes.
I'm going to have to try and convert them. That's amazing.
Oh, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I used to pop those in, and because I was always a curious little kid, and I always remember seeing how shocking and grotesque some of the images were. Like there was this one particular image where they were literally shoveling just a large amount of bodies into ditches and then covering them up, and it was as if the human, the spirit of the human was just waste, and that shocked me quite a lot when I was young, and it's stayed with me ever since. And so the reason why I've looked into war and war history is to try and fill in the gaps as to why that happened and what led to it and how somebody can get to that point as well, which has always been an interest of mine. So it's probably a good thing you had those tapes there, even though it was a bit shocking at the time. Like I feel like it's helped me grow and understand humanity a bit more, which I really appreciate. So I just thought I'd throw it your way and talk about why you'd like to do this particular podcast and what you'd like to get out of it and all that kind of stuff. So,
Look, actually that scene you're talking about, I think, was the Holocaust.
Yes. Yeah.
The kind of the final solution. But look, Adam and I were just talking a while ago about where does it all come from? Where does my interest in military stuff come from? And I've racked my brain and I've struggled a bit, but because I can't find an event or a person that I can kind of say, well, yeah, he or that thing was very important. It's probably a cumulative thing. I must admit, look, probably I shouldn't admit it being an English teacher, that I used to love reading Commando books, little comic books.
It's still like in the same genre.
What it is, yeah, I suppose the graphic novels in a way, you know. But that was my kind of diet. I remember, you know, knowing that I think it was Tuesday or something, 4 p.m, down at the news agency, it was the Commando book would appear. And so Lamont would be there waiting for that particular, I don't know whether it was monthly or weekly, but there was a steady stream. And I remember I learned all the German words like Dummkopf and verboten and Raus, and for my Commando books.
So I've always wondered where you got those from. So that's
Commando books.
Commando books. That's great. Yeah.
So, and really, the Timor thing comes from my uncle, who I never really knew was involved in Timor, and I didn't even know he was a soldier when I was a young bloke. I just knew he was a tough, silent, kind of tall, bronze Aussie, you know, a formidable bloke, you know, a giant of a man who cast his shadow over kind of childhood and also my cousin's childhood. So he was I knew he was a kind of man that that stood out, but I didn't know why he stood out. He was just he just had a presence about him, and to this day, really, that presence is still there. He's such an enormously powerful figure in my history. But I didn't know about his military history. But gradually, because I did a book on Two Up on the Goldfields, I learned about his efforts in Timor in World War II, and I thought, what a story! What an incredible story that so few Australians know about. We know about the Gallipolis, we know about Kokoda, we know about Long Tan, and we know about various campaigns that Australia has been involved with. But the Timor one is, even though it was only a year long, it was a monumental kind of part of our military history, and it was really what happened in Timor was the basis of the setting up of the SAS, Special Air Service, at Campbell Barracks in Perth. It was the book, about Two Up, and all of a sudden this world, this amazing world of Timor was opened up to me, and I must admit I actually travelled up there and have travelled the countryside, and it's an amazing place, the most mountainous island on earth. That's not an exaggeration. The enormous kind of mountains that just rise quickly above you, and then the monsoonal weather as well, where you get the rivers when the monsoons came through, and you'd have boulders the sizes of houses being swept down these rivers by the massive forces of water. It was just it's an extraordinarily kind of dangerous place, and to think these men survived in that with no training, really. They'd brought up in, a lot of them were outback rural characters. A lot of them were from Kalgoorlie, ex-Kalgoorlie. So dry, arid, hot, cold in winter, yes, but to go to this steamy jungle where leeches and kind of the snakes and all of the other stuff that go with tropical environments, they coped, and more than coped.
Yeah.
So So it's I was just saying before that even my dad wasn't involved in World War II. He wanted to go, but he couldn't, because when he volunteered, they checked his blood and he had a very high sugar content, and they thought that's diabetes, and they couldn't have a man in an army or a military who has diabetes because of the medical things involved in treating it, and so they just immediately thought, diabetes, no, we don't want this man. And so he missed out. I suppose it's a good thing. Yeah. I survived, I was the result. Yeah. My dad could have been killed, Yeah. And I doubt whether anyone, was this kind of the white feathers being issued out to men who didn't go. And I doubt whether many people would have tried that stunt with my dad, because he was, he was as tough as, not as big as my uncle. My uncle being 6'1.5", and in the old currency, so he would have been 185, 186 centimetres. But equally as tough. That kind of outback, work and rely on nobody, and you just had to work hard to survive. Yeah. I can't put a figure, I can't put a date there, but
it was part of your whole life.
It's part, a cumulative thing that made me think there's something in kind of studying military stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. What it says about people.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you have this sort of heroic figure like Uncle Jack, and it'd be pretty hard not to.
Well, that's right, exactly. And also the tough characters that Kalgoorlie bred. I mean, it was a wild west town. It was just a world apart from city slicker living in the city. The urbanites, they have no idea of the quality of the men, and they're I mean, they weren't big men, a lot of them. And my father was only 5'7" or so, 5'8", but extraordinarily tough. And I know there was another man that went to Timor. Just trying to recall his name, it won't come to me. But he lived just outside of Kalgoorlie in a little camp. Balagundi was the place, and he lived there on his own. But he was ex-commando of the second independent company who was in Timor. And I remember he used to come and visit my dad sometimes, and I don't think they got on too well. I think there was a bit of a clash of personalities, which happened a lot with my dad. He was an ex-boxer. He wasn't a heavyweight. He was a kind of lightweight, but he was pretty good, pretty very handy with his fists. And I know that he'd start talking with my dad, and because he'd had a lot of punches to the head, he had this condition called being punch drunk. So your brain has been
punchy.
Your brain's been pushed around too many times in the skull.
Yeah.
And it's been damaged. And he'd start talking again. And I'd be just sitting there, and I couldn't almost look at him. It was, I always wanted to laugh, but I knew I shouldn't laugh because here was this poor man trying to talk, and after about, it was like a car, when you're trying to turn over a car, the battery, and it won't turn over, it's not connecting. But all of a sudden, the battery and the engine connected, and then he'd start talking, and it was, everyone was relieved, including
finally
me.
got there.
He got there, yeah. But there's an amazing group of men.
Gentlemen, yeah. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is what kind of led the Australians taking part in World War II, and why they accumulated, like why did they all come together, and why were they then pushed out to Timor? And is that covering what it is?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. So look, I mean, everyone probably knows September 1, 1939, invasion of Poland, blitzkrieg. The poor Polish troops, all they had were horses, and World War I guns, opposed to the tanks of the German war machine. The Tiger tanks and all the equipment which they'd tried. They actually tried all of the military equipment in the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 39. So they knew what they had in terms of equipment worked. And so these poor Poles were just overrun. And then the push south through the Ardennes towards France, and the blitzkrieg tactics, the shock blitz in Germany. In German means lightning. Krieg in German means in war. So this lightning war. So you hit the enemy quickly and efficiently.
Blitz.
The blitzkrieg tactic. And so the push south, and so we all know about that, and we know that also that on September the 3rd, the UK declared war on Nazi Germany. And Australia was very ill prepared for any conflict. I mean, the Australian spending on the military in Australia in the 1930s was limited, and so we find ourselves at the beginning of World War II, poorly prepared for the terrible onslaught which was to occur over the next 6 years. I mean, for example, the Australian Army only had 3,000 permanent soldiers. There are 80,000 part-time militiamen, but that gives you an idea of how poorly prepared we were. So Menzies, the Prime Minister at the time, decided that we ought to get moving, and so on September the 15th, he announced the formation of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, the 6th Division. It was made up of 20,000 men, and then later, in the first half of 1940, the 7th, 8th and 9th Division were set up as well. So, I think they realised quite quickly they had to move and start preparing. And so everyone was expecting, war against the Nazis. And in fact, the 6th Division were sent to North Africa and areas around there. but what happened was that in terms of the second independent company, there were 4 of them set up, but the one we're focusing on is the second independent company, and that later became the second Commando Squadron, and then, like I said, it eventually evolves into the SAS. They kind of realised fairly soon that they'd probably have to have some specialised forces, and so they decided in early April 1941 to send out a questionnaire to a lot of the soldiers who were at various camps around Western Australia to ask whether or not they were interested in setting up a new specialised force. And for a lot of the men, they were pleased with this because they were bored out of their brains. They were just bored senseless. They knew there was a war on. It was like a phony war. There was a phony war occurred in England as well. Before you get the Battle of Britain, the poor British are waiting there for things to happen. And the Australian troops who joined up were the same. What we're doing there, rifle drilling and they're marching and they're saluting. And
so they got all amped up. They were ready to fight.
Yeah.
And they're just sitting around drinking tea.
That's right, yeah. Doing all stuff. And so they were, in this question, they were asked could they sail a boat or fly an aeroplane, or what sports were they interested in, what level of proficiency they'd reached in their sporting endeavours. And so a lot of men, we thought, and I think, I'll mention my uncle again, who was an ex-heavyweight champion boxer at the Murchison. And in those days, if you were a heavyweight champion boxer of any area in Australia, you were very good. We produced some incredibly good boxers in the 30s and 20s, and it's a very strong tradition. And so he was a tall man. I said about 185 centimetres, but quite muscular in the upper body, thinnish in the legs. He wasn't a quick mover, but he was. He could take a punch and give a punch, and if you received the punch, most blokes didn't get up. But my uncle, my father did say about my uncle that he was kind of bloke you could hit with a star picket, and he wouldn't flinch, being hit with a star picket. So
tough.
Yeah, he was, and he was a wood chopper before he joined up as well, and he was a very fit man. He was an unusual man. He ate a lot of honey. He ate a lot of garlic. I remember going around to his place, his homestead outside of Kalgoorlie, and there was always the smell of garlic in the air. And he never drank, and he never smoked, and he was a fitness fanatic, So he was unusual, an unusual breed of man. And throw in the fact that hard physical labour as well, you've got a breed of, kind of like a Superman breed there, being produced. No wonder they kind of had the best of the Japanese, or not had the best, but they certainly matched and overwhelmed the Japanese. But my uncle put in his questionnaire, he had an interview with the captain. The captain said to him, with respect, Private Chin, I think you might be too old, because he was born in 1907. So at that stage, you would have been 32. And my uncle apparently answered back, with respect, sir, if you think I am too old for this new unit, then there is a boxing ring just outside where we can possibly do a few rounds, and then you can make your decision about my worthiness for this new unit, with respect. He ended with respect, but it was almost disrespectful, really. But
he knew the game he had to play to get his point across.
Well, that's
his
right.
Point across is like, dude, we can sort this out,
Yeah, that's right. Forget about all words.
Yeah,
let's try actions. Anyway, so apparently he said that will be all, Private Chin. You may leave now. And my uncle left, and the captain apparently picked up his biro or pencil and put a little tick next to his name. So Uncle Jack was in. Yeah, he was in. But anyway, they decided, well, they'll better get moving. So they were addressed, this big group of men were addressed by Lieutenant Colonel Scott, who was in charge of special operations at the St Kilda barracks at Northern. And as I said to you before, quite a few of the volunteers were ex-Kalgoorlie. And then they left Northern and they caught the train, the Indian, what we now know as the Indian Pacific, across to Victoria. And it was funny, I was only in Melbourne just a while ago, about a month ago or so, and we went to Ballarat, which is where my cousin lives, and the husband of my cousin, very, very knowledgeable man. His father was an officer, pardon me, in the Australian Army in World War II, and he actually said that my uncle went through the station at Ballarat, and we looked all around, and there were photos of some of the kind of troops that had gone through, and there were huge numbers went through, and I just couldn't believe it. Here I'm standing in the Ballarat train station, and Uncle Jack probably had a cup of tea here and a pie here, you know.
Pie.
Yeah, that's right, the pie, you know.
Yeah, no beer because it's a cup of tea. No, didn't drink.
No, well, that's right. Yeah. And then they went on to Melbourne, where a lot of them camped out at the Caulfield racecourse, and apparently there's a story going around. One bloke thought he was royalty because he was camped in the same stall that was used by Far Lap, who won the 1930 Melbourne Cup. So they stayed there for a short while. Then they were taken down to Wilson's Promontory training camp, which is down right on the coast of the Victorian coast, and they did their training there. There was apparently the man who introduced them. The man who introduced them was a Colonel Mahood, and he said to them, well, we've got a special group of men here. We want you to be guerrillas. We want you to be cloak and dagger men. We want you to be hit and run killers. We want you to be saboteurs. So there's a wide-ranging list of skills they had to develop there, you know. But it was behind-the-line stuff, not your normal meet the enemy fire, you know. It was kind of really employing their initiative, employing their independence of mind, and they wanted men like that. They didn't want men who were follow orders or wouldn't know what to do when there was an unusual situation. A lot of these bushmen were
already had a lot of inherent skills in what they were doing out back. They could just apply that here, but just in a different way.
Yeah,
you know?
Improvise.
Yeah,
you know. So that's what they were good at, improvisation, because they didn't have stuff there, so they had to just kind of work their way through.
Yeah.
So there were 4 training wings set up. There was the weapons branch, there was the field crafts branch, demolition and signals. And they'd wake up, their days were very long. They'd wake up at 5:40 in the morning. They were rarely in bed before 10 p.m. So there were 16-hour days every day. And it wasn't, you know, like, let's go have a cup of tea for 3 hours, or, you know, drink lattes for a couple of hours and have a mashed avocado for, you know, there's none of that stuff.
Yeah.
They were training all the time. You know, they were introduced to a wide range of weapons. The Thompson submachine gun, which my uncle was very good at because he was very strong in the upper body, and the Thompson machine gun, when fired, tended to move to the left because of the heavy caliber bullet involved, and so only the strongest men had Thompson machine guns. So there's a Thompson machine gun. They were told how to use knives, knuckle dusters, sniper rifles, so a wide range, explosives as well. And so they had this very rigorous 16 weeks of training, you know, four months of training there. And a lot of the men did make the grade. When I say a lot, that's an exaggeration. There were some men who didn't, you know, just probably their kind of, you know, their ambitions got mixed up with their with their abilities, you know.
Yeah, okay.
They thought they could do it, but when faced with the hard reality of,
they liked the idea of being an independent, specialised company, but that was it.
they didn't actually have the knack or anything else like that to actually follow through with
Yeah.
what they were supposed to do.
Yeah,
okay.
that was it was a bit like the SAS training that they go through now, where only the best succeed, and that's the way it should be. And then they were given pre-embarkation leave, and they were all taken back to WA. They were given 6 days, and so my uncle, I know, went to Kalgoorlie, and I think I've yet to find out exactly when this happened, but I think it was then and there that he married my auntie. So before he went away, he married Auntie Mona.
I'm sure a lot of marriages happen during that 6 week. There's a lot of unknowns going into the future, so you want to have this solid.
Yeah, something to think about, something to bring you home.
Yeah.
Because if you're in the dark days when you're away from home and you're facing an enemy, and there are trying times, and your psychology is tested to the hilt. And so if you've got these little solid things there that you say, yeah, well, I can get through this, because at the end of it, there it is. I know where I'm going. So there they were. They had their 6 days leave, and then they were transferred. Then they went on the train from Adelaide to Katherine, and they stayed there for quite some time, training, and they're getting, once again, this boredom. They felt as though here they are, these men who are bristling with energy and resources and capabilities, and here they are vegetating. They really felt lost, and there were quite a few problems. I exaggerate. There were some problems with morale, where men who are bored and don't know what's going to happen, they get up to stupid stuff, and that happened, without a doubt. There was
especially if you're starting up for like a specialised company like that, you'd have a few egos in there.
Oh,
Men who think that they're the bee's knees and actually are the bee's knees, and they're going to have a bit of head butting or butting of heads, I should say.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that certainly happened, and so it was a trying time. But on December the 5th, 1941, which we all well know is 2 days before Pearl Harbor, which was December the 7th. It was early in the morning, 7 a.m. in Hawaii, when the Japanese attacked. What happened was that all the men were just about to go to bed, or were in bed sleeping, and they received a telegram from Canberra, a top secret telegram, which to this day we do not know the contents of the actual telegram. But the brief of it was that they were to be ready in the morning, 6 a.m, equipment, everything, and they were to be on the station to leave for Darwin. Now, we all know also that December the 5th was 2 days before Pearl Harbor, and we also know that the English had cracked the Enigma codes quite some time ago, and so the British were privy to what the Germans were doing in certain battles.
Oh, okay. So the Enigma codes were the codes that were encrypted almost.
Yes.
That was sent between the Japanese and the Germans, and then in between the Germans as well.
Yes.
So these Germans obviously thought that the Enigma codes were uncrackable.
Yes.
And
they were really, because they were amazing pieces of technology for the time. They were like typewriters, but they had a spinning kind of mechanism whereby if you pressed the letter A, that A would become, because of this rotating rotor system, would become, say, G. And then there would be another rotor, turn around, that G would become L. And then another rotor would turn over, and that L would become, say, T. So there was this, the original letter becomes another letter through a very elaborate kind of rotor movements. And so the Germans were using it, and the English
and they were pretty confident, they were pretty confident that they weren't going to get cracked. And then,
because they were so kind of sophisticated, really.
Yeah.
But for example, the English knew 2 days before that the city of Coventry was going to be flattened. They knew that. They knew there was going to be an armada of German bombers was going to flatten Coventry before it happened. Now, what do? Is that what? Do the English evacuate the citizens of Coventry, or do they allow it to happen? Because they had a terrible dilemma in evacuating. They would be broadcasting to the Germans they'd cracked the code. So what do? You lose that battle. What's it to lose? But you sacrifice lives, huge number of lives, for the greater good, for the greater good of knowing what the Germans were doing. So they had to play God. The English had to win certain battles that were maybe of less significance than others, and win the important ones. So there was a very tricky thing. But the Japanese were using the Enigma codes.
Yeah.
And so the theory is, to get back to this December the 5th thing, the theory is that some members of the American military in the naval division had access to the idea that there was going to be the bombing at Pearl Harbor. It was not. I mean, I am surmising. We don't know, but it was not made available freely throughout the American military or the American government. Did Roosevelt know? I don't know, but it appears as though this information was shared with Canberra. The military intelligence in Canberra knew that something was happening. Why 2 days before, all of a sudden, they are on the platform at Katherine with the express view that they had to get to Timor that day, which they did. But and they were in cattle trucks. They had to shovel out all manure and it was put sand on top, and then it rained all the way to Darwin, so all the slush of the kind of feces of the cattle and the mud together. So it wasn't a pleasant time.
Ah, Jesus.
Very unpleasant. Anyway, they actually got to Darwin, and so they'd actually, to tie it all together, they'd actually left Northern 7 months before that. So there's this long period of training before they were in Darwin. And then they left Darwin on December the 7th, and it was during the voyage to Timor that they learned of Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But on a troop ship called the SS Zeelander, and there was another ship as well, but the troop ship was, I know that my uncle was on the troop ship, and they made their way to Timor, and another group, I think it was the second, third independent company, went to Ambon, and I think the first independent company went to a number of islands, various, not one place, but islands throughout Southeast Asia. So there was a sense that they were preparing for a Japanese kind of movement south. And Timor, when they first arrived, they were at Kopang, and then they were shifted from Kopang to Dili, which is the capital of Portuguese Timor. And just to give you an idea of the size of Timor at the time, it was 450 kilometres long, about 80 kilometres wide, and as I said, kind of very mountainous. And my uncle was a big man. He had big feet, size probably wouldn't be quite Shaq O'Neal type size, but he had big feet, and so he actually said that he really struggled climbing up those mountains. They weren't hills; they were mountains, And the smaller men who, of smaller stature, smaller feet, like they could put their feet into the toe holds and grab, but the bigger men, they struggled. They really did. And even though my uncle was a very fit man, he didn't like he didn't like having to move around, and that was what they did in Timor. They had to move around. They were a true mobile, guerrilla force.
Thank you for listening to the Australian War History Podcast. If you're on Facebook, please go to Facebook.com/Oz War History, AUS, for updates, and subscribe or follow using your favourite podcast app. Tune in next week for another episode in the Timor series.